everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name's Abigail Cabunoc Mayes. I lead open source maintainer programs at GitHub, and I'll be your host for today's panel. So we have a really important discussion today as part of GitHub Universe. We wanted to really highlight the people, the humans behind open source. So we'll be talking to a couple open source maintainers about what it means to be a maintainer. So joining me today, we have Barbara Forbes. Barbara is a GitHub star and Microsoft Azure MVP with a focus on PowerShell and infrastructure as code. And we have Tierney Siren, is a principal developer advocate at Twilio, where they spend their time working with the product teams, improving developer experience. So we talked a bit about your title and your day job, Tierney. I'd love to hear more about how you got into open source and what you maintain now.
Yeah, so for open source, I originally got started playing video games. I played a lot of video games, probably when I shouldn't have been. And through that, I kind of found a bunch of different communities, and those communities, they kind of ended up leading me into, okay, like how do I maintain a community, how I manage a community, and that, led me to forums. So I opened up a bunch of free forums, and then, free forum systems weren't really doing what I wanted. So from there, I moved into like, okay, how do I actually set up my own forum? And I got involved in MyBB. I did that for, I think, like 2 years. Mm-hmm. And from that, their release cycle was a bit different than kind of what I was wanting from software, from open source. It was a bit slower than I was looking for. So from there, I started kind of like branching out, like, okay, I like JavaScript, I like web development. This is the thing I'm interested in. What are some other things that I could find and get involved in? Because I really like this code and open source stuff. Mm-hmm. From that, I was going through kind of JavaScript and JavaScript Twitter, and found a blog post by Michael Rogers that was kind of announcing the fork of IOJS out of Node, and doing a really good job at welcoming non-technical contributions. There's like a whole paragraph at the bottom just kind of saying like, hey, this is a very technical thing, but there's a bunch of work here doesn't require you to know like C++ and like hardcore JavaScript and like performant JavaScript. So I, got involved in that, showed up to the website working group repo, started writing a bunch of content, and like trying to help them kind of do better content, because I was a really good writer, and like, talk about technical things, but I wasn't like necessarily experienced with like, performant JavaScript and stuff. Right. So from there, I did a bunch of work in that repo. Eventually got to the point where it was like so much work that I was doing in that repo that it was kind of drowning out the other work that was happening. Mm-hmm. So we split that off into the evangelism working group, and from there I just kind of continued going up in Node and doing more and more there. Eventually got a job offer from that. I was in college at the time, and was able to take that at NodeSource and then kind of grow out from there. So.
That's awesome. And what are you maintaining today?
Yeah, so today I work on Node still. I'm a core collaborator there. I also work on Electron in the outreach working group, mm-hmm. and I can do a lot of work on like RFCs for NPM.
Yeah, that's great. So you found that community you fit in, and then they had the skills that they needed. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was able to kind of start with the thing I was comfortable with, and honestly, through exposure to the other people there, I was able to like get a lot more comfortable with the things that I didn't necessarily feel as good at. Yeah. So I am, I can write pretty good JavaScript now. Maybe not as much C++. I try to avoid that as much as possible. But I was able to grow because of that like non-technical base. Yeah. And grow into my entire career. Now as a principal developer advocate, focusing on JavaScript.
That's awesome. Thanks, Tierney. And Barbara, can you tell me a bit about how you first got into open source and what you maintain now?
It happened a little bit by accident. Yeah. So what I was doing was just doing my day-to-day job, working with Azure, working in automation, and really creating my own solutions for problems I encountered in my own work. And I started blogging about these things, thinking, well, maybe someone else has the same problem. And often I would publish the code on GitHub just so I have somewhere to store it. Yeah. And I write the blogs about it, and then suddenly I discovered that people were adding stars to my repository, and they were creating issues and stuff like that. And I was, okay, this is a serious thing now. I need to start maintaining this stuff. So really just by accident, like, okay, this is now something people can use.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what are you maintaining now?
I mostly have a lot of PowerShell modules and examples of infrastructure as code, like Bicep. Yeah. And one of the modules that actually I didn't expect at all, but it really took off, was basically a wrapper around the SandGrid API, which you like.
Yeah, I'm very happy to hear that.
So the SandGrid API, I made a wrapper in PowerShell, and I thought, yeah, maybe people can use this. So I'll put this online, and I put it in the gallery, and then I checked, and it had like 40,000 downloads. And I thought, oh, I can't just make some changes now. Like, I can't be like, oh, change this because like 5 people are using it.
Yeah.
Now I have to actually be careful. So I need to check if a change is actually breaking and have some sort of process going on.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the fun things when your own projects like take off, because you never know which one will.
Yeah, that's true. So I love this. We have 2 different approaches to entering open source. Barbara making a tool, then the community showed up. You're suddenly a maintainer.
Exactly.
And then Tierney finding that community and bringing your skills to it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So what, Barbara, you talked a bit about the challenges you face, but are there any other big challenges that surprised you about being a maintainer?
Well, it is part of the thing where you don't know what will take off and what won't, especially with your own projects. That can make it really hard to manage your time, because you feel a responsibility. Like you created a project and suddenly people are asking you to fix things or to add features. Right. And maybe you've got other things going on, and if it's not your full-time job, then you have to do it in your spare time. And that can feel like a big responsibility. Yeah. Where I found myself like, oh no, there is a bug in there and I need to fix this now because now people have expectations. Yeah. So I had to learn to just answer to issues like, I'm aware of this, you are right, maybe this is a workaround, and I will try to find time to fix it, but maybe you can fix it.
That's good,
and stuff like that.
Yeah, because you want to be as helpful as possible, but you're giving this away for free. You don't have the time necessarily to fix everyone's issues.
Yeah, and it's okay to say that. And that's something that I had to learn, that it's okay to say, if I'm going to fix that, I'm going to fix it later. I don't have the time now. Yeah. And that's okay.
Cool. So thanks, Barbara. Tierney, what challenges have you found?
Yeah. I think, honestly, the biggest challenges, I've seen, I think every project is different, right? Depending on how big the project is, depending on what communities the project is serving, there's going to be different challenges and different problems. A lot of the projects I operate in are like very large-scale, widely used projects, and I think when a project gets big enough, honestly, just communication between people is a huge, huge challenge. Right. And like some people are going to struggle with that more, right? Or some people are like, you as an individual are going to communicate differently than other people will. And being able to kind of manage that and like find a way where you can kind of be okay, in your own communication, and like having that difference where that might not be as easy. It's something you would like choose to do outside of open source. Right. That's a really big one for me. I think in terms of smaller projects, personal projects, I think just dropping perfectionism is really important. It's hard to I can sit there and work on a project. I mean, I've done this so many times. Usually when I'm on an airplane, I have so much free time to just sit and write code. But yeah, just, being okay with something being imperfect, being not complete, and like just putting it out there and having it be in that incomplete state, I think is really important. It's really easy to just keep focusing on this needs to be the million things that need to be better. But just getting it out there and even in barely functional or non-functional state and being able to work on those iteratively, right, in the way you would in a bigger project. I think that's a really big thing that I've seen be helpful. And through other open source things, projects that I've worked on, there was a decentralized open source social protocol that I used to be a part of called Tent. Yeah. And the kind of creators' goals in that was to have it be perfect at 1.0. And over and over, whenever anyone's had a perfect at 1.0, we've seen that it's never perfect at 1.0. Yeah. And so just allowing it to ship and allowing it to move forward is, I think, a really big and important part in smaller projects that are trying to gain a foothold.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and that's something I still struggle with working open, is just that vulnerability of putting something out there for others to see for the first time. But again, if you're putting something imperfect, that just leaves room for others to come in and fix it. Yeah,
it's, that's the way that you can have good first issues. And that's a thing that isn't really possible in bigger projects. Once a project has become very evolved, it's very hard to actually have like meaningful good first issues that someone new to the project can come in and solve.
Yeah.
This is an issue in Node and Electron and Chrome and a bunch of other like large projects.
Yeah.
You can always go to the smaller projects that are like orbiting those, but you can never do that in the actual main project. So like it's a very
You on top of things.
yeah, it's a very blessed period to be able to
Right.
have those small things that people can come in and contribute to.
Yeah. No, I hadn't thought of it that way. That's great.
And I think it's a good point where it's like you're really putting yourself out there, especially if something is big. And I think everyone's familiar with imposter syndrome,
Yeah.
where you feel like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing, and they're going to find out, and they're going to say, you did something really stupid.
Yeah.
And
Are you really a developer?
yeah, exactly. And it can be scary because
Yeah.
when are you a developer? When are you good enough at a language?
Yeah.
There are no set limits. And the only way to find out is to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
And just take that chance. I recommend always finding someone you can trust. So if you feel yourself getting stuck with the feeling, then you have someone you can trust and say, hey, I'm not feeling confident about this. What do you think? Should I put it out there? Is this
Yeah.
okay? Something like that can really help to make sure you don't get stuck in that feeling.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. It is so much easier to jump in if you know that there's a friend there with
Exactly.
you. Yeah. So do you have any advice on how to find those people?
For me, I always found them just close to me in my job, because a
Right.
lot of things that I do are also my work. And those are people I work with every day, and they know what I'm doing, and they know what my levels are and how I feel about stuff. And I'm
Yeah.
always very open about it, which helps me just to have some people where I'm say, I have no clue if I'm doing it right.
Yeah.
And I often even say, I know this is silly, probably, but just check this for me and I
Yeah.
can let go of it because I feel I'm getting stuck. So I'm
Yeah,
really
yeah.
open about it with the people I really trust. And that has really helped me to get out of feeling stuck.
Yeah. That makes sense. Trini, do you have any advice on finding people? I know you've found community really well. Yeah.
I think the big thing for me is just like, I don't know, I've been in a bunch of different communities, and I've always found like one person in every single community I've been in who like I really just like get along well with and
Yeah.
like can have just like normal kind of like chit chat with, and like we end up being really close.
Yeah.
And I think finding those people who like you can connect with personally, regardless of what the project is, regardless of how how involved you are in that project, like finding those like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people, and just being able to kind of evolve that relationship with them, and those relationships will last beyond whatever that project is,
Yeah.
or your involvement in that project or their involvement in that project.
Yeah.
And so like being able to find that and have those few people that you can really rely on and like reach back to, I think is important. And I think the way I've historically done that has just been be very present, be very communicative, and that's my communication style. I know not everyone's communication style is that
Yeah.
way, but like I think just generally being present and there
Yeah.
is a really good way. And like it's really easy to think, oh, like this person hates me, or like
Yeah.
there's some issue there, and just kind of trying to step out of that self reflection of like how you're kind of being perceived by other people when you don't know that. That's another big one for me too.
Yeah. And then play video games with them every night.
Oh yeah, I mean most of those people I play many hours of every game, every 6 months, new game. Yeah.
I think that's great, and it just shows how this open source community really expands past just the code and really is, your life. Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many people I've made really long-lasting relationships with. One of them is a hubber, Miles Borens.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Just
Miles
we're
is great.
Just friends now, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's just great to like, he's sending me pictures of his kids and
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
It's so sweet.
Shout out to Miles.
Absolutely lovely person. Yeah.
I hope you're watching.
Yes. So like Miles, good example of like a friend who's like very honest with me,
Yeah.
and like, just a good person, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of relationship and maintaining that. Open source is a really good way to find those relationships and kind of build that out.
That's great.
And I think we need to mention it, you don't get discouraged if you have some negative experience.
Right. Yeah.
Because we're all humans and we're only talking through text. And I think we all know the feeling when you're typing with an emotion and you're typing
Yeah.
harder. That's, by the way, a very good time to step away from your keyboard.
I agree. Yes.
But there are going to be misunderstandings and we're all going to be different peoples. And some communities maybe there are people that aren't that nice to beginners. It happens, and it's important to think it's never personal. And if someone is dismissive to you or something like that, okay, you do you. I'll go to a new project. I'll see something else. I won't make any issues anymore, stuff like that. And that's really easy to say because it can almost be hurtful if someone does that, but it happens. And something to roll with.
And that's a good point. The open source community isn't just one giant community. There's lots of small groups you can pick and choose from and see where you fit and see where you want to contribute to.
Exactly.
So Barbara, I'm actually interested. What do you wish someone had told you when you first became a maintainer?
I think actually that part. That part where like you don't have to please everyone, and not everyone's going to be friendly, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And basically it's their loss, and it's okay to make mistakes. And I did that once. I made a module for PowerShell where I thought, oh, the world needs this module. And I published it, and I made a blog post, and it turned out it existed already. And it was huge already. It was like, how did I miss this? And I thought, oh, this is so embarrassing, and everyone's going to remember that I did this stupid thing. And guess what? No one did. No one remembers it. It's one of those things that keeps you up at night. You're thinking, oh no, I said something stupid. It doesn't matter. It's okay to do that. And no one cares in the end. And everyone was like, okay, you made a good effort.
And it makes you human. People can see your mistakes. Yeah,
exactly. And that's okay. It's okay to make mistakes.
Tierney, do you have any thoughts on what you wish someone had told you when you first started in open source?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a similar vein, like, mistakes are okay. I used to really beat myself up and, like, you know, get in people's DMs of, like, hey, was this okay? Like, I messed this up. And it's like, I, like, opened a PR in the slightly wrong way or something, right? Like, my first PR ever to Node, actually, or to IOJS at the time, was I was fixing Markdown links that didn't need to be fixed. They were, like, relative links, and I didn't know that. And so the PR got closed. And so, like, that kind of thing is, like, I beat myself up over that, but I kept going and, like, stayed there. And I didn't know if that was the right thing at the time.
Great thing is you learned something from the PR.
Exactly. And I think that's the biggest thing is it's okay to mess up as long as you learn something from it, right? Messing up and not learning something from it isn't okay. Like, and that's, like, where you should try to either, like, you know, there's a bunch of things to do in that situation. But I think if you're always learning from your mistakes, that's like the progress in open source. And, like, even outside of code, I've, like, learned a lot about myself and, like, been able to become a better communicator because of open source. And maybe not everyone will have that experience, but you know, that constant self-reflection and, like, mistakes being okay is a really big thing that has helped me over, you know, almost a decade now.
Yeah, what I'm really hearing from both your answers is just how much you can learn from being in open source. And just this experience of collaborating with people from different cultures and countries and learning to collaborate over text.
Collaborate and the cultures is a good thing to mention as well, because I'm Dutch and we're known to be very direct. So
that doesn't come...
we sometimes have to remember, and I'm conscious of that. Like, I know we are direct, and other cultures might think different of that. And, you know, there are some cultures who will, like, almost apologize for existing when they ask you something. The stuff like that is really good to be aware of some things being cultural. But how cool is that? That we can collaborate with stuff all over the world. I mean, it's awesome.
That was something I learned at Mozilla with people in, I think especially India. They would ask for permission before they jumped in. And we were ignoring those questions because they're like, oh, this isn't like a real question about the code. They can just jump in, but different cultures. You need to approach them a little bit differently if you're trying to collaborate.
Yeah, exactly.
And that actually is a really big one that I wish I had learned more about. There's this kind of concept of, like, ask culture versus guest culture. Are you familiar with this? That was a hard one to learn about because like, I'm a certain way in that. And, like, it's a really good concept that, like, oh, people actually do, like, interact differently than I'm expecting them to because it's how they don't interact how I interact. So that's another one. Definitely go look that up. Ask culture versus guest culture is really important in open source.
All right, so to close us off, what advice would you share to future maintainers who might be here on stage next year?
Well, the first advice, everyone can, I think. And my advice would be to not focus just on, I need to create a PR and I need to be an expert at the code at that. There's so many things you can do to contribute. You can create issues to let people know that you have found something or suggest a feature. You're already contributing then. You can check the code, you can check the documentation. You can even check for typos in the documentation and fix those because they are there. And it will be a way to get in. Another thing you can do is write blog posts about a project or give talks at user groups or organize user groups. There are so many ways to become part of a community and you can find what fits you most or what is the lowest threshold for you and the rest will come on its own.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that reminds me a lot of Tierney's story about fitting in with the, it's like, oh, I know how to write.
I think my answer to that is like, don't just do one thing. Don't overwork yourself. Like, don't be spending 80 hours a week doing open source if that's not something like you can do as part of your job and get employed to do it or like be paid to do it. But do work on Node or PowerShell or whatever language or tool you want to work on. Like, go work on a project in that, but also simultaneously have some other projects that like interest you or solve something you want to do. That's something that I found really valuable is like approaching open source in multiple ways at the same time has been really huge. Even like, something in terms of like content, one of the kind of paradigms on GitHub that I really love is awesome lists. Some of my most starred repos are just awesome lists. Like Awesome Hyper I started like 6 years ago, Awesome Developer Streams. Those are projects that like people really liked because it gave them something. And like I just kind of followed a template and like enabled it. And then at this point I've completely handed those off to other people. But like that kind of thing and like doing finding different ways to engage and see how you'll fit into open source is, I think, a really good way to approach that.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for joining me. I learned so much and enjoy the rest of your universe.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.